Hey everyone, my name's Kush and this is Akarsh, and for our project, we worked on recreating an NBA game in 3 dimensions. So what does this mean? Well, given a video of an NBA game, we took the various RGB views from the images from different views and brought them together to create a 3D representation of the game. We hope that something like this could actually be used to help coaches conduct 3D analyses or create 3D datasets of the game, as well as potentially replace referees in the future who might have human biases of their own. So let's take a look at our final output. We'll go into more depth about this throughout the video. I'm just going to skip through it, but this is just giving you a taste of what's to come, and we'll explain how we exactly recreated this. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about our approach whenever my computer works. All right.
Sweet, let's talk about our approach. So first step was acquiring data, which we'll talk about next slide. And then after we had our data, which was a video, for every frame, we found the players in the image plane and we found their 2D pose. So these are like stick figures in the image. And then we found the position of the ball in the image plane. So this is a 2D location for the ball. And then for every frame, we also calculated the position, orientation, and the focal length of the camera that's viewing the image. And we did that based on the court and how it's oriented. And then finally, we took these 2D estimates of the players in the ball and we found their 3D locations using the camera's position orientation. And we arrived at our final results.
So this is actually the data set that we used, just a clip from an NBA game from the 2020 season. And you can see over here, this is just one view, but there are 2 other views that we used. And these are just still images from the 3 different views. So we got the video off YouTube, separated it, and manually found 3 different views. And for pose estimation, we actually used AlphaPose, an open source software. And we just ran the script and it generated these keyframes over each player for each one of the views. Now, this is where we started building our own thing. We wanted to find the ball for each one of the images, just so we could render that. However, it's pretty challenging, just because if you look at this, the ball is in various different shades and various shapes, so it's not an easy problem. Our first step was actually just using the CV2 template matching algorithm, which was very naive. It just didn't work too well at all. Then we started building up. We used the Huff circles algorithm from CV2 and compared it using an RGB metric to our color data set. So we just used an RGB metric, a lighting invariant metric using HSV, and a Gaussian mixture model. So we built up on all 3 of these. And this is kind of our output, detecting the ball from the entire image. It's not ideal, but it worked enough that we included it in our final product.
Sweet. So let's talk about how we did the camera pose estimation. So the camera has 7 degrees of freedom, which is translation, orientation, and focal length, and we need to find these for each of the frames. So the way that we do this is we first find the camera pose for the first frame, and we use an energy minimization technique to find the camera pose for the next frame given the first frame. So let's talk about how we found it for the first frame. Next slide. So first things that we did, we found a schematic of the court online, and we processed this heavily to get the image on the right, which was we processed it with the GIMP. Next slide. So for this, what we did is we take the AlphaPose's 2D human key point detections and dilate them in order to create a mask of what parts of the court are being included. And we also added the score box. So this tells us what parts of the court are being covered up. Next slide. Then we do image pre-processing of the data. We perform an edge preserving filter. As you can see on the left, there's our data. We perform an edge preserving filter and convert it to grayscale and then run the canny edge detection algorithm. And then we finally get rid of the players and the score box using the occlusion mask that we just saw. We do the same thing for our model. We reproject it into the image plane, and then we get rid of the players and the score box to see this, to get this. Next slide. So let's talk about how we found the camera pose for the first frame. We use something called a population-based search. And basically what this means is we took 10,000 different random camera poses from this distribution, as you see, where the red points are camera locations. And then we basically just found the camera location and pose that best fit our data. Next slide. So these are like some 16 views randomly sampled from that. So this is what kind of like what they look like. And we're trying to find the ones that best fit the data, but we use 10,000, not 16. Next slide. So that, however, did not work out well due to local minima in the population-based search and a bunch of technical reasons. So we opted to just manually labeling the key points for the first frame. We manually labeled 4 key points, and we got a homography matrix that shows us how to go from the image to our model. So that gave us the camera's pose. Next slide. So let's talk about how we found the next frames estimation using the previous frame estimation. We use energy minimization. And what does that mean? So basically, we turned our projection of the model court into the image plane into a differentiable step with PyTorch. It's end-to-end differentiable. So after we had that, we took the end and we made a loss function that took the closest point-to-point distance in the image plane between the point cloud of our data and the point cloud of our model. And if we're minimizing, if we backpropagate all the way to the camera degrees of freedom, we can basically slightly nudge the camera's degrees of camera pose in order to minimize this loss and more accurately model our data. And this was actually our unique contribution for our project. Next slide. So as you can see here, the blue point cloud is the observed data. The red is our model court. And the green lines are like the point-to-point distances randomly sampled in the point clouds. And we're trying to minimize these green lines, like make the distances shorter. And then the next slide is showing another example of this. Next slide. So finally, we need to take these 2D key points into 3D. So the way that we did this was we shot out rays from the camera center through the pixels of the image, and it's like going out into space. And then next slide, from different views. So for this, we have many players in image 1 and image 2, and we need to find the correspondences between the views in order to go from 2D to 3D. We create an affinity matrix, which tells us how well two players geometrically match up based on their shot out 3D rays. Then finally, we take this affinity matrix and we run the Hungarian algorithm to find a matching between the players in one image to the other image. And the overall reasoning for this was to find a way to go from 2D to 3D. And next slide. Finally, this was our end result. So as you can see, we have our observed data, our 3D model court on the right, and then our model reprojected onto the image plane. And it turns out the players are really accurate. As you can see, whenever he's jumping, the stick figures are also jumping in our model. So it turned out to be spotty, but when it is there, it is accurate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.